What's going on YouTube? This is Brian916. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the channel. So behind me here, I got Eddie's Dodge pickup, 4.7 V8. We're going to take a look at it briefly and try to ascertain what type of issues may be going on with the truck, specifically the engine. I noticed the check engine light is on, so we'll take a look at that real quick and just sort of gauge the health of the vehicle. So I know Eddie drove it up here, over 300 miles without disconnecting the battery. So whatever issues are present likely are the only issues concerning why the check engine light may be on. So I'm pretty sure all the monitors are set, and whatever that light is on for, I'm pretty sure is a legit issue. So let's take a look at it and let's see what's going on. All right, so I got my little handheld launch plugged in, so we'll start here with this scan tool. This is a pretty good mid-range scan tool. Can handle most typical check engine light issues. If we need bi-directional controls or anything like that, we'll move over to a more powerful scan tool. But judging that he drove this thing all the way up here from SoCal, I'm not thinking that it's going to be something too serious. So we'll just do a generic scan really quick, see what we get. All right, so let's just read the code, see what we got real quick. Yeah, see, I figured it was something not too serious. So we got a catalyst system efficiency code, typical P0420 code. Looks like the computer threw the same code twice. And post catalyst fuel trim system too rich, bank 2. So we'll take this code. This is actually a different code. So I'll go over to Identifix and read some code setting criteria for this. But my gut tells me that all this stuff is pretty much related. It's probably all due to whatever problem caused this efficiency code. A piston ring could cause this issue, or a misfire could cause this issue. So let's just go over to the motor and try to gauge what's going on there. First thing I'm gonna do on this is I'm just gonna throw a vac gauge on there with the engine running and see if the exhaust system is plugged. I'm gonna use a vacuum gauge for that. Pull out this little vacuum plug and hook our vac gauge in there. Alright, so we got our vac gauge hooked up. Let's fire it up. See what we got. So right here, that's pretty healthy so far. I mean, anything between 17 and 20 inches of mercury is what they call it, but I always say inches of vac. Between 17 and 20 inches of vac really is somewhat of a healthy engine, although there's obviously something going on. I can tell the engine seems to be struggling a bit while it's running, so I'm surprised it didn't translate into the vac gauge. But really what we're looking for is for this needle to drop when we raise the idle, or when we speed the motor up. And we're gonna watch this and see if the gauge drops. you're dealing with a plugged exhaust system, usually the needle will start to fall off by now. So don't think we're dealing with a plugged exhaust. So we'll roll that out on our catalyst problem of it being some exhaust restrictions. So let's move on. So I'm noticing here that we definitely got some smoke from the tailpipe. It's not a thick white smoke from like it burning coolant, so it's probably not going to be able to be seen on a camera. However, I can see it right now. It's like a bluish tint, so I think it's burning oil. Let me speed the motor up and see if it'll burn a little bit more oil. I think you guys seen that. So I think we might be dealing with a piston ring issue. So let's move on to the motor and get some compression. Okay, so let me get a few things removed so that I can check the compression on each cylinder. So let's get all these coils unplugged. Before we do that, let's get these heater hose pipes kind of free so they don't get in our way. Alright, so give us a little wiggle room to get around them. Okay, let's unplug all the coils. Okay, so we got bank 2, all those out. Let's get all the coils out on bank 1. This thing's got to be moved out the way. No big deal. Alright, so let's get all the spark plugs out now. Spark plugs are in very loose. Wow. Now, these things are in really loose. I could just spin them out. They're pretty much already broken. Yeah, these spark plugs, it's probably the loosest spark plugs I've ever felt installed in a cylinder head. Spark plugs do need to be pretty tight. You do have to snug them up. They are plugs, cylinder plugs. They do plug the cylinder. Alright, so we got all those out. Okay, so put a little bit of oil on the threads on my compression gauge. Try to keep it from getting stuck in there. Alright, we'll just go ahead and start on bank 1, cylinder 1. Work our way down. Let's get let that oil work in those threads a little bit. Make sure we don't have a problem with our gauge getting stuck. Alright, before I crank it up, let's keep track of what cylinder did what. Keep track of which cylinder is doing what. So we'll do it like that. Alright, let's see, 2, 6, 8. We got 8, 7, 1, 2. 6, 5, 3, 4. Alright, so we'll keep track of which is what. So we got bank 1 over here, bank 2, obviously the front of the motor. right, let's keep track of what cylinder's doing what. Unplug the fuel injectors. We got all the fuel injectors unplugged as well, so we won't have any fuel squirting in. All right, looks like we're ready to crank it up and see what kind of numbers we get. Go ahead, Des, crank it up, wide open throttle. All right. One more time. All right, we got about 165 and cylinder 1 dry, or 165 rather, dry. Okay, we'll jump across over here to cylinder 2. Alright, crank it up, wide open throttle. Uh, 150. Alright, crank it up again. So this one's about 150 dry on cylinder 2. So we'll write that down, dry, 150. Okay. Next, we'll move over to cylinder 3. Alright, crank it up, wide open throttle. $50, $60, $65, $50, $55, $60, $65. So we got 165 on the first one. One more time. So 150, 155, 160, 165 on cylinder 3 dry. All right, let's move over to cylinder 4. All right, wide open throttle, crank it up. Uh-oh. Okay. Looks like we might have found the problem cylinder. It looks like we got about 125 and everything else was around 165, 150. So let's crank it up, wide open throttle one more time. Yeah. So this cylinder's falling behind just a little bit. It went up a little bit more. So we got 120, 125, 130, 135. So it went up to 135. Dry. So let's jump on over to cylinder 5. We can see this cylinder is a lot healthier than the other cylinders. This one is up about 175. It's 180 right now, but it looks like at about 5 cranks it went up to about 175. Crank it up again, Dev. That's good. All right, so this cylinder is putting out 180, and that's cylinder 5, dry. 180. So we can see right now we already got, it's gonna be an erratic running engine. We got a lot of different numbers popping up in each cylinder. Every time I see cases like this, engine always runs somewhat rough. And in his case, Eddie engine does run rough. However, it doesn't really misfire, but it runs pretty rough. And these numbers are starting to sort of explain why it runs that way. I know these engines, the characteristics of these engines, they do have a little bit of vibration to them, but this one's a lot more than what I've seen on most of these 4.7s. All right, Des, let's crank it up. Cylinder 6. All right, so I can see we've found our problem cylinder. That is a lot lower than everything else. All right, crank it up one more time, Des. All right, that's good. Yeah, so this cylinder is considerably lower than all the other cylinders. So we know, let's see, let's write that down. So we got about 120 dry on cylinder 6. Cylinder 5 had 180 compression. So we already know this engine is one cylinder is well below the variance that it's allowed in compression differences. So we already know there's something going on here. All right, let's continue on. We'll get 7 and 8 done. See what those are putting out. Okay, so we got it hooked up in number 7. All right, Des, go ahead, crank it up. About 145 on cylinder 7 dry. Go ahead, Des. One more time. All right. 150 dry. Maxed out at 150. All right, let's move it over to number 8. We got some pretty inconsistent numbers here. All right, let's crank it up. So 165 dry. All right, one more time. All right, so about 165 dry. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cylinders with the lowest numbers and I'm going to add some oil to those cylinders. Let's see if we got a ring issue here. So I'm going to add some oil to the cylinder. So we're going to do a wet test on cylinder 6 and then we're going to do a wet test on cylinder 4. Just by adding some oil in the cylinder, let's see if it'll boost the compression. So just add a little oil in those cylinders. Give it a minute to work its way around the rings. All right, let's get our gauge in there. All right, so this is wet. Crank it up, Des. So we are jumping up. We jumped up from 135 to 150, 155, 160. So we jumped up to 160 wet. Let's get some oil down in cylinder 2. Actually, cylinder 6. Give that a second, let that oil work its way around the rim. All right, crank it up. So not much changed on cylinder 6. Crank it up again. So 120, it stayed at about 120 PSI on cylinder 6. All right, so I want to leak down test cylinder 6 because it's the lowest, has the lowest compression of all the cylinders. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my compression gauge in there, and I'm going to leave, or my compression hose in there. I'm going to leave the gauge off, rotate the motor by hand until I hear air come up through the hose. Then I know I'm on a compression stroke, and I'll just stick like a quarter long extension in there just to make sure it's on the top of the stroke. But to find the compression stroke, we'll rotate it until some air come up out of here. Okay, so to be able to get a socket down on this crank pulley, I'm gonna have to remove the fan clutch, move it out the way for a moment. So I'm gonna grab this big 36 millimeter wrench here and get this fan clutch off. We got our fan clutch off. Go ahead and pull it out the way. Now I can get a socket on the crank bolt, be able to rotate this motor by hand. So let's grab a socket for that. Alright, so I heard it hiss. So we're on a compression stroke. So now I'm going to remove my compression gauge altogether and put a long extension in there. so that I can actually find TDC. Change the motor. Keep an eye on this extension right here until we get it on TDC. You can see it going up. Alright, so that's it. Top dead center, compression stroke. Alright, now let's get our leak down tester and see why we have 120 psi in this cylinder. When we added oil wet, it was still 120, so likely it's not a ring issue in that cylinder, although it probably still could be, because we did have a lot of smoke coming out the tailpipe. But we do have some other cylinders here that are producing low numbers compared to the highest number cylinder. So let's just check the lowest one. I already have enough information to pretty much get a good idea of what's going on. This engine's basically worn out. But let's leak down test it and try to give us a little bit more. All right, so let's set up our gauge. See, I already got some grease on the threads from the last leak down test I did. So let's get it in cylinder 6. Let's get some shop air going. So we do have some leakage at about 80 pounds. We got about 30% leakage. So let's open up our oil cap. Open up our radiator cap. Throttle body. Check the tailpipe. Alright guys, so it's definitely leaking through the exhaust valve. Let me increase the pressure to give it a little bit more leak so you guys can hear it coming out the tailpipe. Alright, so I put a glove on it to see if it'll blow the glove up, which it is starting to blow the glove up slowly. But see if you can get a listen there. So you can definitely hear the air coming out. All right guys, so I got a little bit of smoke hooked up. I'll show you here. So just so I could try to show you guys that it's leaking out of the tailpipe. I mean, I can hear it, but you guys probably can't hear it. So maybe you can see it coming from the tailpipe. It's also leaking from the adjacent cylinder. I'm going to show you that here in a minute, but let's see if we can see it leaking out the tailpipe. So you can see all that smoke right there coming out of the tailpipe. So yeah, we definitely got a exhaust valve leak. Exhaust valve likely not seated properly. But on top of that, guys, we also have We also have a leak from the adjacent cylinder, and I just got this spark plug started in here just a bit. But I'm gonna pull this plug out here and show you guys that we also got some leakage over to the adjacent cylinder, which typically would indicate maybe a warped cylinder head or a blown head gasket or maybe even a cracked head. But in this case, I don't know if he's ever had any overheating on this vehicle, but it could be a warped head or something like that. So you can see, once I unplug it, this smoke is actually coming from the adjacent cylinder. So this is cylinder 6, and we got smoke coming from cylinder 8. So there you have it. I gathered enough information on this car to be able to make a decision. All right, guys, with all the information that we gathered, I'm just here comparing it to the specs here on Identifix. And so basically, I wanted to look up the compression, what's the manufacturer specs for the compression. And basically, the way they want you to check it is basically, here's the minimal amount of compression allowable. So right here on engine compression, the minimum amount of compression is 100. I mean, obviously, if you go below 100 psi, it's going to be a misfire. So, but basically, how you check is by variances, and it's 25 psi variances. So what you're going to do is basically, it says highest allowable difference between the lowest and the highest cylinders. So basically what that means is I'm going to take my compression from cylinder 8, which was or from cylinder 5, which was 180 psi. We double checked, we checked twice, and we got that same number. And you're going to compare it to the lowest, which is 120. So when we compare that, obviously it's over 25 in variance. So when that happens, you got unbalanced engine with different compression pressures. So we're already out of spec here. But also we took it a step further. This is enough here, but we took it a step further, and we leak down tested cylinder 6, which was the lowest, to see why it was so low. And we had compression loss going to cylinder 8 and also going out through the exhaust pipe. So with all these findings, I believe that number 4 probably has a piston ring issue, which will explain the smoke that we've seen coming out. And also it makes the most sense that when we added oil to the cylinder, it jumped up from 130 psi to 160. But when we added oil to cylinder 6, it didn't jump up at all. So that tells me compression is leaking here through 8 and the exhaust pipe, but compression in this one is leaking through the piston ring. So had we did a leak down test on cylinder 4, we probably would have got some air coming through the piston rings. So basically, this engine is worn out. I think it's got like valve seats not seating. It's got worn piston rings. So Eddie was definitely right in wanting to have this engine rebuilt. I would definitely go the rebuild route on this motor. Also, we got the P0420 code. I checked it with a vacuum gauge to see if we got a plug catalyst. We don't. Likely the catalyst is broken because of, or the catalyst is having low efficiency due to probably like a smoky tailpipe. Will definitely ruin the catalytic converter. So that's probably what's going on. Well, that was just a quick little assessment and try to gauge what's going on with Eddie's engine before we just pull it out and start rebuilding it. Now we know we need to get him a catalytic converter. We know that, you know, it is warranted to go ahead and do a rebuild on it. And so it's always good to sort of get an idea on a vehicle before you start doing, you know, any repairs on it. So Eddie was definitely right, and wanting to get the engine rebuilt. It certainly could benefit from some new rings and a valve job. So we'll go ahead and start pulling this motor out. We'll bring you guys along. We'll get this engine built. Thanks for tuning in, guys. It's Brian 916. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next one.